So I'm happy to welcome you to the session Achieving Climate Smart Utilities, Digital Tools for Ambition Increase. Let me take over the presentation quickly. All right, so before we start, I'd like that the session will be recorded. So if you don't want to appear in the recording afterwards, I must kindly ask you to stay anonymous by not using the chat function. So for everyone else who agrees with the recording, please feel free to use the chat function as much as you want, but for everyone else, you can stay anonymous by not using the chat function and you won't appear in the recording. The recording will be made available after the session. And during the session, please turn off your cameras and microphones unless you're one of the presenters. Please note that we will use WaCCliM during this session. WaCCliM is an application that allows the users to interact with each other, for example, for votings. You can either use WaCCliM in a browser, on your laptop, or on your mobile phone, which I'd actually highly recommend, because if you use it on your mobile phone, which you don't see if I show it into the camera, I just noticed, but if you use it on your mobile phone, you don't have to switch between the different windows on your laptop. In order to do so, please enter in your browser app.wassembly.com and enter the keyword WaterWater for D. Thank you, Nina also posted in the chat. And I would kindly ask you to already start with opening the WaSamply application so that you are ready once we start with the questionnaires. All right. So today, this particular session showcases solutions for measuring and reducing greenhouse gases at utility and national policy level, emphasizing the potential for mitigation and adaptation through digital tools and through positioning water in national climate strategy. We will learn about the Ecom tool and hear a testimonial from Zambia. So to become climate smart, water and wastewater utilities must take action to improve climate resilience, but also reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. After all the inputs given, we will have some time for a discussion. So feel free to use the chat function during the inputs to pose questions. We will either address them directly after the presentation, in between, or during the discussion. If you have a particular question to a particular presenter, please write down the name to the question. All right. Good. Now I'd like to hand over to Mr. Thomas Stratenwert for the introduction. Mr. Stratenwert has been head of division in the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature, Conservation and Nuclear Safety for more than 15 years. There he's responsible for international and European water management with a focus on climate adaptation. Mr. Stratenwert, the floor is yours. Feel free to unmute yourself. I will have a look if you have troubles.
Yeah, I hope you can understand me. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the BMZ and the GIZ for organizing this week on water for development. I would also like to thank GIZ and IWA for setting up this concluding event for today. As we just heard, this event will focus on how we can achieve decarbonization in the urban water sector, starting from the utility perspective and from the national policy perspective. The objectives of the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial times. However, as we all know, we are unfortunately not on track. The World Meteorological Organization estimates that there is a 20% chance that global warming will reach 1.5 degrees already in the next 5 years. At the end of the century, warming might even reach 4 degrees or even more, a scenario that is considered by a number of scientists as quite realistic still, unfortunately. But why are we not on track? First, because our ambitions on decarbonizations are not strong enough or not well implemented. Second, because we do not involve all sectors of the society yet. Water and wastewater handling accounts for about 4% of the global electricity consumption and, depending on the energy source, respective greenhouse gas emissions. In many cities, water and wastewater utilities are the largest public user of energy. In addition to that, wastewater collection and treatment processes involve the emission of the highly potent greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxides. Emissions from the urban water sector are not a secret. But still, only a handful of countries prioritize water for greenhouse gas mitigation in their national determined contributions. I hope that will be a few more after the current ambition increase process finishing this year. Today, we want to find ways to change that. How can we make sure that climate mitigation action takes place in the water sector? We are aware that climate change is not the only priority for utilities. It is hard work to provide safe and clean water and sanitation services at reasonable costs. Under the current pandemic, these services are even more essential. Clean water for hand washing is indispensable for avoiding the spread of diseases and must be part of the recovery. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions of utilities, such as enhancing energy efficiency, improving operating and maintenance, and reducing water loss, non-revenue water, can also reduce utility costs in the middle and long term, and therefore help us to kill two birds with one stone. In this light, we need to support utilities in assessing and reducing emissions and related costs. This should not be rocket science. The WaCCliM project has developed a tool on behalf of BMU. Today, we will learn how it works and which experience countries made so far in implementing it. But helping utilities is not enough. These efforts need to be complemented at the national policy level. For instance, through integrating water aspects into the NDCs and the MRV processes. And by integrating climate change mitigating efforts such as enhanced energy efficiency into water sector regulation. You will also address these issues today. As Federal Ministry, we are committed to support our partner countries in combining water and climate action, both for climate resilience and greenhouse gas emissions. With that, I wish you a very interesting and interactive afternoon. And I will certainly be with you for a couple of minutes and listen to what you are discussing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stratenwert, for the introduction as well as joining the session. Martin will put on the presentation again. Thank you, Martin. All right. Now we'd like to use beforehand mentioned WaCCliM application to have a look at the audience. Now that we've heard that it's not enough to help utilities, but we also need national policy and an enabling environment. So now we want to know, what is your professional background? Please use the WaCCliM application. And Nina has, maybe Nina, you can post the link again and the keyword in the chat so it's easier to open it. We would like to know who's listening to this session. So what is your professional background? NGO, research, policy, utility or private sector, or other? Thank you, Nina. All right, and Matthias has shared the results. So I see it's working quite well with the WaCCliM application. So we have some experts here. I can see it's actually quite evenly distributed among NGO, research, policy, utility or private sector, but NGOs are currently leading, but not, there's not a big difference between NGOs and utility. All right. Great. Now NGOs are leading again. Okay. While I let these results still running, we can also have a look at the second question already. So the second question is, do you think your work can influence decision-making towards climate-smart utilities? There are three answers or answer possibilities. So either absolutely, yes, but it is a long impact chain, or no. So what do you think? Does your work influence decision-making towards climate-smart utilities? Okay, so we already see the first results that disappeared again on my screen, but hopefully we can see them again in a second. The results. Yes. All right, so 30% has answered absolutely. Very optimistic, but the majority has said yes, but it is a long impact chain. But I can live with both of these answers because none of you has said no. So I'm glad we have the right audience here. And yeah, I think we can switch back to the presentation. Thank you, Matthias, for showing the results, and back to the presentation. Martin. Okay, so I think this worked quite well. Once we can see the presentation again, I'd like to hand over to Ms. Corinne Tromsdorf for the keynote. So Ms. Tromsdorf is CEO and founder of Water Cities, a non-profit business with the mission to support communities in transition to becoming more and more water wise. She has over 15 years of experience working as a with a focus on energy efficiency and optimization in the water sector. And again, to everyone, if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat function and we will address them afterwards. So Corinne, the floor is yours. I don't hear you yet, but I hope you can unmute yourself in a second.
Thank you, Elaine. Can you hear me now?
Yes, it works perfectly.
I just took over the presentation, so hopefully this will work. Thank you for inviting me, and hello, everybody. As we already heard from Thomas, and most of you are aware, water utility, let me just get to my first slide. Yeah. Water utilities are one of the urban services most affected by climate change, which threatens their capacity to actually deliver on their mandatory missions of delivering safe water and protecting rivers. Water scarcity, together with increased water demand, requires to seek alternative supplies and work on reducing consumptions. Reduced water quality as a result of both climate change and overuse requires utilities to invest in more stringent drinking water systems. The reduced low flows in rivers and the associated increased temperatures reduce the acceptable load a river can handle and triggers requirements to treat wastewater to higher standards. increase intense rain events, make it harder to protect against floods, and also increases the flows in combined sewers that then need to be stored and treated. Because of these impacts that we can already start to feel, and because scientists tell us they will only be increasing in the future, cities and their water management feel the urgency to take action, to adapt. But not so many feel the urgency to contribute to reducing the magnitude of this change by reducing their own emissions. They feel doomed to adapt and not empowered to tackle the source of the problem, as their own potential mitigation action seems to them as a drop in the bucket, for which they do not have the human and financial resources to spend. Oops. We all work with priorities. If a plane is about to crash, the engineers do not spend time working on reducing its fuel consumption, but focus on advising the pilot to keep the plane flying. The more the adaptation needs become urgent to maintain the service levels, the less bandwidth will the utility have to actually invest in the mitigation effort, unless it had already adopted through board decisions or regulatory incentives to include carbon reduction in the multi-criteria assessment of their future actions. And we're already seeing this. For example, facing water scarcity, a utility may, in the urgency, build massive desalination plants without aggressively reducing its consumption and losses. If it had had more time, it might first have planned to reduce consumptions and losses for a few years and reassess the desal needs for a smaller plant. In the end, utilities make choices to optimize the outputs they are mandated to deliver. Now, you may wonder, does it really matter if the utility reduces its carbon footprint? Is it a game changer in the mitigation effort? Here are a few facts to help you make your mind. As we heard, water and wastewater utilities use about 4% of the global energy. So the energy mix of the country has a major impact on the total footprint of the utility. Then there are process-related emissions that vary depending on the quality of treatment, its fine-tuning, the type of treatment and biosolids management. If we look at the WaCCliM pilots, it gives us a sense for the order of magnitude of the utility operational emissions, and we can observe quite a big variability between different cases. Just to note, these figures are calculated using the Ecom tool, which will be presented to you later in this session, and do not include the footprint of constructing the assets themselves, nor the footprint of the energy used by the utilities' buildings and vehicles. But when we compare to fuel-based water heating in home, or to the carbon footprint per capita in different countries, we're talking about water utilities representing a few percent of the total emissions. Might seem like a drop in the bucket. However, water utilities, if empowered to take that role, can become catalysts for the local greenhouse gas emissions reductions for 3 reasons. 1, they work in partnership with many urban stakeholders and the consumers of water, who all have a small but significant potential to reduce their emissions. Second, they themselves as a utility can significantly reduce their emissions, in some cases up to neutrality, if this is set to them as a target. And third, the added costs to do this are actually not very big. And in some cases, there is a return on investment. And it also opens the door to accessing international climate funding. Utilities can become the drivers of an accelerated reduction in global emissions. That is the choice that a few countries have made already, but the planet needs a lot more. In the session just before, we heard about the case of Hamburg. We also know about Jordan, who has included urban water in its national determined contribution to reducing global emissions. So that's a national commitment. And Denmark has set a target of carbon neutrality to all their urban water utilities. We're at a crossroad. We either aggressively reduce our global emissions, which require to seize every opportunity to reduce, or we continue to feel doomed and powerless to make a dent at reducing emissions. And we accept that we as a global society will lose lives, lose in quality of many lives, and spend billions in protection and repair from damages. I'll let you take a quick look at this graph and share a quote from Henk Ovink, whom I also credit for that graph. Many say business as usual is not enough, but actually, business as usual is lethal. We are the turning point. We are here where that red box is. And we can decide to let the change increase in magnitude or take actions which each might seem insignificant, but that contribute to collectively filling that bucket. Utilities are facing choices when they plan their assets. For example, on wastewater systems, they can compose with an array of solutions that range from conventional energy and concrete intensive approaches to a resource factory approach, leveraging nature-based solutions when appropriate. On the water supply side, they can convey water from further away or reduce losses and consumption. Combining the two is also an option. They can plan more stringent treatments or protect catchments to improve source quality. So what will push the balance towards low carbon solutions? It's having a vision and knowledge on what is possible. Having a policy that requires to reduce emissions and justifies investing public funds to deliver on this additional mission. And having clear guidance from climate funds. So now we'd like to hear from you again. And I'd like to ask you to go back to that app that you just used before, WaCCliM, and answer the following question. Do you think the utility in the city you live in is technically able and empowered to reduce its carbon footprint? I'll give you a small moment to get to the app, but before we share the results of this poll, I'd like to share with you a key message and a call to action. Adaptation. Oh, there's an echo. Adaptation will happen as we start seeing changes, but can jeopardize mitigation if we urgently have to adapt rather than plan our long-term adaptation. Mitigation can only be the result of a collective effort and therefore needs to be a mandated task. Similar to what we've experienced recently in these COVID times. A mandatory confinement combined with individual behaviors respecting the instructions led to reducing the epidemic to a manageable level in many countries. Once confinement rules were lifted, at least in France where I live, we observed many people stopped being careful, thinking their individual behavior was not going to make a difference. And now we observe a significant rise in the virus again. It is very difficult to drive individual change that each make a small contribution to a collective target. I'd like to leave you with a call to action for utilities to develop their knowledge and capacity on low carbon technologies and approaches, because that's where we need to move. Policymakers to set the mandate to adapt to the impacts of climate change, obviously, but also reduce the emissions. And for international institutions to support both utilities and policymakers with clear technical and financial guidelines. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I'll give the floor back to Elaine to show us the results of the poll on what you think.
Thank you, Corinne, for your presentation and a call to action to utilities, policymakers, and international institutions. I would kindly ask Matthias to share the results. I hope you were able to participate in the assembly poll. All right. So we see a desktop, but we don't see the results yet. Perfect, there you go. So the question was, do you think that the utility or utilities in the city you live in are technically able and empowered to reduce their carbon footprint? So we have an interesting distribution. So we have equally distributed neither ready nor empowered, ready but not empowered, ready and empowered, but very little when it comes to empowered but not ready. So we can say that, well, we have mostly utilities that are ready, but not empowered, or ready and empowered. So it's difficult to really draw attention to one of the answers, but I think it's very rare that utilities are empowered but not ready. So we can say, so when they are ready, they're missing the empowerment, but also when they're ready and empowered, that's actually the best you can have. And this is the majority for now, so ready and empowered. And I'm glad to see this here in our call. I hope that for the 9% that selected empowered but not ready yet, that this will change, because if they're empowered, it shouldn't be so difficult to get ready, so to find the steps to the right direction. Okay, thank you, Matthias, for showing the results. We can go back to the PowerPoint presentation. All right. So next comes Adriana Weisaga. She will talk about the Ecom tool. Adriana is an environmental engineer who has worked as a laboratory and research assistant in Bolivia, and has also been working in Germany within the project WaCCliM for a year now. And she is strongly focusing on the Ecom tool and is currently developing a methodology to create a business as usual scenarios in Ecom, with Ecom, or using Ecom. So Adriana, I kindly ask you to take over the presentation.
Thank you very much, Lane. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
For some reason, I cannot take over the presentation.
If it doesn't work, you can also tell us or tell Martin, and he can press on the next slide.
Yes, I think that will be better. For some reason, I cannot. Oh, yet now I can. Now it appeared. So, now the presentation is gone. Could you share it one more time, please, Martin? Perfect. Thank you very much, Elaine, for the kind introduction. And hello, everyone. Good day, good morning, good afternoon. As Elaine mentioned, I have been working with the Ecom tool for about a while now, and today I will be presenting it to you. But before we go deeper into Ecom, I would kindly ask you to go for another question, to ask another question through the WaCCliM app. What do you think Ecom stands for within our context? So we kindly ask you to go into the app online and choose your question or choose your answer. So if we could give just a minute and then we could start presenting the results, it would be great. Okay, we're reporting some technical issues, so we're going to wait a minute.
I think it's working now.
So now we have the results. Yes, most of you have done a good guess. Most of you choose the energy performance and carbon emission assessment and monitoring tool. Some of you I can see are a bit hungry and wanted to eat candy and muffins. But it was a pretty good guess. Now we can take over the presentation again. Please, Martin or Elaine. And thank you very much for participating. And thank you, Matthias, for showing the results. So, as most of you guessed, Ecom stands for the Energy Performance and Carbon Emission Assessment and Monitoring Tool. Ecom is a tool for ambition increase. Ecom was developed under the project Water and Wastewater Companies for Climate Mitigation, WaCCliM, and it helps to understand the GHG emissions of the urban water sector. WaCCliM Ecom as a digital solution helps utilities to understand their GHG emissions and up to a certain point the energy efficiency of their systems. So it can also provide opportunities or reveal opportunities for energy efficiency improvement and GHG emission reduction, which can result in a more energy efficiency system, or also in cost reduction. Among the main characteristics of Ecom, it is that it is free and open source. You can find it online in our webpage, and it's based on the IPCC methodology. We have dropped the link there in case you want to visit Ecom now or later, now quickly or later. But before we dig deeper or discover Ecom, I would like to present you a little bit about the evolution of the tool. As you can see, the tool started as an Excel sheet back in 2015, and along the years it has been developed and improved. Developed and improved in the sense that new components were added, new characteristics of Ecom were added. For example, more efficient way to assess the pumping efficiency of water systems, or which is with the version 2.2. Now we have the new fecal sludge component. But with this graph, what I would want to highlight is that Ecom is also now currently under development into its newest version, the version 3.0, which will, among other things, among other improvements, include the new GHG models, for the new GHG models of the latest IPCC refinement report. So this tool will be available by the end of the year or beginning of the new year. But let's now focus on the version that we have available now in our webpage, the version 2.2 of Ecom. We talked about the urban water cycle, but it is important to say what exactly the urban water cycle incorporates or what it exactly means. So Ecom can assess the GHG emissions within the operational boundaries of a utility, from the water collection, treatment, and distribution to the collection of wastewater, treatment, and discharge. And additionally, since 2018, the new component was added, the fecal sludge component with the stages containment, treatment, and disposal. Now, with regards to the different GHG emissions that Ecom considers are the ones produced by wastewater treatment processes like nitrous oxide or methane, but also the carbon dioxide emissions related to the energy consumption. Now, additionally, Ecom offers us a tiered approach, which means that we can do two different types of assessments: the Tier A, or the initial assessment, that gives us a wider GHG emission assessment with data that is usually available, usually easily available in a utility. But we can also have the Tier B, or the detailed GHG assessment, that gives us a more thorough assessment with more detailed data. So another important thing to say about Ecom and the work that the project has been doing with Ecom is that over the last years, we have produced a lot of additional resources. For example, you can find online the methodology of Ecom, how was it developed, which equations were used, and etc. We also have exercise book for people to self-train themselves on the tool. We also have tutorials, and we as a project have provided a lot of trainings in many parts of the world, and we currently provide also trainings in many parts of the world. So you can click on our resources with following the link that's given on the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to take you with me to discover Ecom and to do an initial assessment to show the possible potential or the potential of the tool. In order to avoid any technical difficulties, we decided to record my screen while I explore Ecom. So I will share my screen right now, and I will be narrating through it. So Elaine or Martin, you can tell me if you can see the video.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect, then I continue with the presentation. As you can see, this is the landing page of Ecom. That's we can go through the links that we provided in the PowerPoint presentation. We can choose from 6 different languages. And on the left side, we have a menu that gives us many characteristics of Ecom and can help us jump from one place to another. Now for the assessment itself, we have the opportunity to open an assessment that we already have and edit it and work it through, but also the opportunity to create a new one, which is what we do right now. Now we're immediately asked to provide information about our system, such as name, assessment period, currency, and any other comments that we want to leave in the assessment. Now we're directed to the configuration page, and here we can choose which type of assessment do we want to do, if it's the Tier A or if it's the Tier B, if we want to choose just one or one substage, or if we want to choose it all. Now on the right part, we can see the configuration of the tool itself, in which we provide information such as the emission factor for grid electricity, BOD generation, or protein consumption. We can edit those manually, but if we don't have the information, now we can have pre-selected values that the tool provides us. We can also choose if we have full NGs at any stage, and which source of IPCC report do we use for the global warming potential. So if we click on next, we continue to the next page, which asks for the population according to the stages that we activated or the systems that we want to evaluate. An important characteristic of Ecom is that if we put the mouse on top of any concept, it gives us what it is, so that we are clear on what the tool is asking for. Once we have introduced our population, then we start the assessment itself. We have the Tier A assessment that you can see here, and here we have overall setting of Ecom, which we have the inputs on the left side and the outputs on the right side. The inputs for the Tier A assessment are very few, as you can see. The tool also provides us the possibility to choose between yes/no questions from our user-friendly interface, and also drop-down menus that can help us identify our system way better. Now, on the right side, as we put information, the results will be shown in graphics. We can also choose them to be shown in tables. We're not showing them right now because we will do this later. And we also have on the bottom left side some service performance indicators, and on the bottom right side, the results with regards to the GHG emissions according to our systems. So now on the top part, we see this bar, and we see the different stages, sub-stages of the detailed GHG assessment. We will take, for example, the abstraction of the water supply system right now and explain it in detail, and the rest of them will be we explain quickly because they all have the same configuration. As you can see here, we see also the inputs on the left side and outputs on the right side. Now, the inputs on the left side and top, we can see the inputs that we need to put for this detailed GHG assessment. But if we want to do a more detailed assessment, such, for example, if we want to evaluate our pumping efficiency, then we can go down, as you can see on the screen, and then we can add some more information with regards, for example, electromechanical efficiency of pumps. And if we have different pumping stations, then we can add more sub-stages. Now, on the right side, and also differentiated by the colors, we can see the GHG emissions. We can see GHG emissions are related to the energy usage. We can see the total amount of GHG emissions and some energy and some service performance levels indicators. Another important aspect of Ecom is that we can click on every input, and we have this table with more information, like, for example, which formula was it used to calculate this output. So now we continue showing the rest very quickly, the rest of the stages, and as you can see, they all have the same configuration, but of course with more specific information for the stage. The same thing happens when we go to the wastewater system. We have, again, the inputs on the left side, outputs on the right side. Now for the treatment part, we can already see another important characteristic of Ecom, which is the ability to do estimations. And these estimations are based on the data that we gave with regards to population, energy mix, and DBO production, and etc. So as you can see, the use of estimation, it's even wider from this point on, also from the fecal sludge management in the stages of containment, treatment, and finally, the reuse of disposal. So once we have introduced all of our specific information, then we can jump directly to see our results. Here we see our summaries, and we can have this infographic where we can see our total GHG emissions. We can see them by system, water supply, wastewater, or by stage. We can also see which emissions we avoided, for example, if we have biogas valorization or carbon sequestration. Now we can also see our results in terms of energy efficiency according to the stages that we activated. So that was a very quick tour through Ecom, but in order to show you the real potential, or the potential of the tool of the project, I would very much like to present an initial assessment. Then again, I recorded this one and I will be narrating through it. So We thought it would be great to use one of our resources that you can find available in our webpage to do our initial assessment. This is the WaCCliM exercise book. And as you can see in a few seconds, we will have the exercise itself. And I've cut some parts and put it in during the video so you can see where the data is coming from. So they tell us that the city is called water scarcity and the utility is called new water division. They also give us information that the assessment period should be around 364 days. Additionally, that's very important, the assessment period, because all of our evaluation will be based on this assessment period later. So as an extra information, we're just going to put that we're doing an initial assessment. So in the configuration part, as we're doing an initial assessment, we're going to select only those ones. In addition, they tell us that the utility or the city has the same mix as Mexico. The other options we leave it by default. Now, with regards to the population, they tell us that the city has 600,000 inhabitants. And from those 600,000 inhabitants, they tell us that 500 of them have water supply services and are connected to the sewer system. But only the water of 400,000 people is treated in the wastewater facility. So with regards to the fecal sludge management, they tell us that 500 people have on-site sanitation. So once we have introduced our population, we click on next and we start the assessment itself. So as you can see, we can already see some results, and you might be asking yourselves why. And this is because we have given the tool enough information to do some assumptions with regards to population, energy mix, DBO, and etc. So now we have the information for the water supply system. They tell us that it has a certain amount of energy consumption. They also give us the information that the water is extracted from wells. It's around 25 million cubic meters per year, or assessment period in this case. They also tell us that the running costs are around 10 million euros, and a little bit more than half is used for energy. So as you can see, we can already see the contribution of the water supply system to our entire assessment. Now we will start introducing what we're asked for in the wastewater system. They tell us that it consumes a certain amount of energy. They also tell us, and it's very important, that the water that is conveyed to the treatment facility is the same water that is discharged to the effluent receiving body. So in this case, these are 17 million cubic meters of water. And they also tell us the information that the nitrogen concentration is 50 milligrams per liter in the effluent. The running cost for the wastewater system is around 8 million euros, from which less than half is used for energy. Now, they don't give us any information with regards to biogas, valorization or production, but they tell us that the treatment type is activated sludge with minor poorly aerated zones, and once the sludge is treated, is sent to landfilling. So as you can see, we can already appreciate the contribution of the wastewater and water supply systems to our entire assessment. We can also appreciate some service performance levels indicators in the sense of how percentage of the population is serviced by water supply services and wastewater. Now we continue with the fecal sludge management exercise, and we are told that it's used 600,000 kilowatts of energy. They also tell us that they use trucks for transportation, and overall they consume around 10,000 liters of diesel. They also give us the efficiency of emptying the containers, which is 50%. They also provide us the information that we have no groundwater infiltration. And the containment type is pit latrines, communal pit latrines. So we choose the containment type that we're told to, that we're with information that we're given. The treatment type of the sludge, once it's picked up, is anaerobic digestion. And the treated sludge is sent for land application afterwards. They also don't give us any they also tell us the information that we are not using, we're not producing biogas nor valorizing it. So once we have introduced all of our information on the left side of the tool, we can already see our end results of the initial assessment. And as you can see, we have different graphs. We can already see that most of the GHG emissions come from the electricity consumption. Now, on the bottom right bottom part of the screen, you can see the different GHG emissions. Let me just quickly go back here. The different GHG emissions per system. And as you can see, the majority of GHG emissions, or the system that has the most GHG emissions, is the fecal sludge management. So as you could see, this was a very easy to use, a very intuitive tool that can help us evaluate the performance or the GHG emissions of a utility. Now, if you want to continue with the exercise, we kindly invite you to just go into our webpage. You can find exercises to do the detailed assessment afterwards. You can find tutorials and videos, as I said before. So that was it for my presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them on the chat. Back to you, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Adriana, for the quick guide through the Ecom tool. So there is one question / comment from Leonardo van Straten. He wrote a sophisticated tool, but input should be prepared thoroughly. Is that right? So can you say a few words regarding the input? What is needed? What do you, from your perspective, what would you say, Adriana?
It depends on which evaluation do we want to do. If we want to do an initial assessment, for example, as you could see, we don't have that many input that we need. And an important thing of Ecom is that if we don't have the information available, then there are some things that we can just assume. If we want to do a more detailed assessment and we have the inputs, then of course we can use them, but it's a tool that works with as much as information available possible that we have. So, and for that, we as a project have our very specific Excel sheets, Excel tables, where we put all the information to help our utilities understand, okay, what is needed, what is not. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Adriana. Yeah, and you can also find this Excel sheet on the link that I just posted, WaCCliM.org/Ecom tool. So feel free to go to the webpage and read through the steps. It's really easy to use the Ecom tool, and as Adriana already mentioned, it works with a lot of estimations. But of course, if you have more thorough information, more thorough data, and measurements, of course, the results are better than the ones based on estimations. Okay, thanks, Adriana. Let's go to our next presenter. Let's talk about or hear from someone who might share the experience using Ecom. So Martin will now share the presentation, and Martin, I also kindly ask you to click to the next slide once Curtis tells you. So our next speaker will be Curtis Musea, technical inspector at NAVASCO, the National Water Supply and Sanitation Council in Zambia. So I hope everything works with the microphone. Please, Curtis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I hope everyone can hear me. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone.
Just tell us if you want us to switch to the next slide.
All right, thank you so much. Just having a little bit of a technical challenge here, but yeah, someone will be able to run through the slides for me. Yeah, so as has been introduced, my name is Curtis Mulea from the National Water Supply and Sanitation Council, the regulator in Zambia. And yeah, we just want to share what has been done so far and what we intend to do as far as using the Ecom tool is concerned. So on the background, hope we are on the background slide. Just as a background, we're trying to say that like most countries, we are a party to the United Nations Framework for Convention on Climate Change, and as such, we are required as a country to report on the emissions every after 2 years. So with the coming of the introduction of the Ecom tool, we see it as a very important tool for us in order in putting information together for that particular report, because of the ease with which the tool can allow the users to have access to the information. So on the next slide, continuing with the background, we're saying that the report, the national report includes GHG emissions from different sectors. But we just want to emphasize that this also includes emissions that are recorded in a water and wastewater treatment and discharge, where we come in as a regulator and the water sector. So on the next slide, that shows emissions from Zambia's waste sector. That's a chart that you see there that displays the information, the data that we have gathered. But I might say it has not been updated by the time of this speech. We do have more recent data, but however, just to show you that we have up to 2010 information regarding GHG emissions, and obviously it shows an increasing trend, therefore the need for us to do something about it. So that's the kind of information that we will be able to put together. So what that shows is a combination of not only the water sector, but also other sectors like was mentioned in the previous slide that talks about waste from other sectors. On this next slide, with them, we're talking about piloting the Ecom tool in Zambia. So the Ecom tool was piloted for Lusaka Water and Lusaka Water and Sanitation Company. As some of you may be aware, Lusaka Water is the largest utility in Zambia, and was selected because of it having at least the capacity and also the readily available information that we could be able to we needed to input into the data and into the Ecom tool. So that was why Lusaka Water was piloted. But obviously, what we want to see is that after piloting with Lusaka Water, we want to upscale it to the rest of the other 10 utilities in the country. So Lusaka Water, from the time that the piloting started, have done quite a number of things. They did internal training for all the utilities that were important in terms of getting information into the system. That included staff from maintenance sections, sanitation section, the sewer sections, the laboratory, and the water supply. So it was quite an important training for the utilities and for us ourselves, because we wanted information coming from different departments and everybody to be on the same page. So far, Lusaka Water has reported that they have enough information in the system, and the baseline data has been established. Of course, the only challenge is that we haven't been moving at the pace at which we needed in terms of getting information into the tool. But as of now, we can safely say that the baseline was set and the information is looking good. But also, like I said, in terms of why we haven't moved faster than we needed, was because the utility, and also largely just to say the sector, is trying to restructure, particularly when it comes to the sanitation sector, where as a regulator we've moved in to regulate on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management. So these sectors were largely unregulated, and also the commercial utilities, the service providers, really paid very little attention to these sectors. But in the recent years, we have now put in place guidelines and regulations that should be able to help utilities. So with that restructuring, obviously utilities, depending on the size, will move at different paces in terms of catching up. And we are hoping perhaps in the next few years, we should be able to get to a place where everything is in order and we can have real information that we can talk about. That's one of the challenges we've had. On the next slide, talks about the institutionalization of the Ecom tool. I did mention that we, at the end of the day, want to see all the utilities using this information. It's the only way that we're going to get information from across the sector. So in so doing, we have begun some restructuring within the regulator ourselves. We have an information system that we've been using for years. It's called the WaCCliM Information System, or NIS for short. And we have done quite a number of work already just to compare what Ecom 2 has and what the NIS has, and how can we align the two information systems together so that information can easily flow from one system to the other. So we have identified key things that need to be updated in the NIS, particularly when it comes to the fecal sludge, the FSM, fecal sludge management, and OSS, which is on-site sanitation sections, which we think we're missing quite a number of data fields. So we have identified those. Then also other things like on the emissions, influent and effluent of BOD and COD loads, and etc. Things that don't are not there in the NIS as we speak. But we have identified those, and we have also engaged our developer for the WaCCliM information system to incorporate those missing fields. That will really help us. The next thing is that we have been developing a guideline in line with our mandate as a regulator. We develop guidelines for the sector. One of the key guidelines we've been developing in the recent past is the energy efficiency guideline, where myself have been, most involved in the development of that guideline. So we also looked at things that needed to be included in the guideline, borrowing from the Ecom 2. Particularly when you talk about assessments and reporting, measurements and opportunities in energy efficiency. We have seen those, so those are going to be included there. Then also we plan to institute targets, subsector targets. We have realized that we don't have targets. What are the targets that we want to achieve as a subsector? not as a country, but as a water supply and sanitation subsector. Those I think are key for us as a regulator, because it is using those benchmarks that we assess progression in terms of how each of the utilities is moving. On the next slide, as I conclude, but really just talks about now what are the things that we need to do, or things that we have already begun to do in order to institutionalize the Ecom tool in the subsector. So one of the things that we have done is, like I said, is that we have already begun the process of modifying the NOASCO information system, and also incorporating the identified issues with the energy efficiency guideline. The things now that we need to do that may need to be done is to identify the gaps and needs in the commercial utilities. I did mention in the preamble that the commercial utilities across the country are at different stages really, in terms of, you know, where they are in capacity, and also just how they have progressed even in access to water and sanitation. They are all at different stages. So we want to conduct a gaps and needs assessment in all the utilities for us to be able to now strategize in terms of how we move forward. What are the gaps that need to be filled in? Therefore, informing the next step of the training that for me, I think are very necessary, and we need to do that. We are drawing lessons from Lusaka Water that has been piloting the two. Lusaka Water, like I said, is one of those utilities that is the biggest utility in Zambia and has quite capacity. But even then, we had lots of challenges that required, you know, a lot of capacity building. So we're going to need a lot of that moving forward if we're talking about, you know, institutionalizing it in all the rest of the commercial utilities. Then, of course, as a regulator, we produce our benchmarking report, which is the NOASCO urban and peri-urban waters and sanitation sector report, which shows the comparative performance of all the commercial utilities in the country. That report, I think, will be a very good report for us to include issues to do with also how the energy sector is moving, and also any other relevant, you know, performance indicators that we can give to the utilities on how they are moving in GHGs, energy efficiency, and so on. So we have planned to include those performance indicators in the 2021 performance report, because 2020 is already halfway gone. So we are looking at 2021, and that's why we're doing all this background work to come up with that. So that was the last slide.
Thank you, Curtis. We didn't hear the end of your presentation, but maybe it was just me. But thank you so much for this interesting insight from Zambia. Are there any questions to any of the presenters that we just heard in this session? If so, please use the chat to post them. Otherwise, when we look at the time, we can also move on to our next speaker to give the closing words. I'll give you 1 minute to post the questions, but I don't see anyone typing, so I can already start to introduce our next and last speaker. And already from my side, I think thanks a lot for listening to the session. So our next speaker is Dr. Kala Varamoti. He is Executive Director of the International Water Association and an expert in water resources management. He is currently member of the Asian Development Bank's Water Advisory Group and professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras, India. So I don't see any questions, so I hand over to the closing words to you, Carla.
Okay.
The floor.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. I would just begin by thanking all the contributors for their inspiring inputs. I found it very, very interesting and thought-provoking. I think this concludes not only the event, but also the first day of the week on Water for Development, the day focusing on water and climate change. So greenhouse gas mitigations in the water sector often seem difficult. And what we often hear from people working in our sector is why should we care? Because emissions are so low compared to other sectors like energy and transport. And they also ask questions if we can even monitor these emissions. However, today we've learned that emissions from the water sector do matter, that the sector is a large consumer of energy and emitter of carbon, and that monitoring these emissions is not rocket science, and methodologies, tools, and mitigation options are available. We also learned that there is a lot of ambition from within the sector to reduce emissions, with some of the more sort of ambitious utilities aspiring almost to carbon neutrality in the next 25 to 30 years. And this will be delivered through a combination of energy efficiency, renewable energy generation, and purchase of low carbon grid electricity. And we learned also today from the testimonial given by a couple of the presenters that it can be done nationwide, but also through collaboration, it can be done globally. All this shows that there is no excuse for us within the water sector to shy away from climate mitigation action. But it's not only us. Decision makers from the climate change community must acknowledge the relevance of water, not only for adaptation, but also for mitigation. And our efforts will only succeed if the water sector is included in the national greenhouse gas inventories and national climate mitigation policies and plans. This year, the members of my association, IWA, are under particular pressure. The pandemic has increased global attention on clean water and sustainable wastewater treatment, but many of our utilities are struggling with financial challenges. So during this difficult time, we have been supporting our members in maintaining their service levels. However, one opportunity that stems from this crisis is that, it has encouraged and potentially accelerated a shift towards a more climate-friendly paradigm. As mentioned earlier, our sector has begun already pursuing energy positive wastewater treatment. They've embraced nature-based solutions and applied circular economy principles to urban systems. But we can advance and expand these efforts in the current and post-COVID-19 era, backed with financing from progressive green climate funding entities. A tangible opportunity has arisen through our pragmatism. You see, governments now want to invest in shovel-ready projects that can be rolled out fast at significant scale to boost recovery. Working at the nexus of public health and economic development, water professionals can adapt and advance our most urgent priorities in a climate-friendly way. At IWA, we have recently launched a Climate Smart Utilities initiative and a knowledge platform, climatesmartwater.org. The idea of this initiative, a community of practice, is to promote dialogue on this topic, aiming to ensure that water utilities share their experiences on their climate smart journey and have a space to learn from each other. It is a community of practice focused on the utilities' needs and a sustainability approach through sound financial planning and strong governance. The goal is really to support utilities on their climate smart journey and inspire all water professionals to embrace this change. Our profession has long worked behind the scenes and as a result has too often been taken for granted. It took the COVID-19 crisis to evaluate our quiet work into the open where it belongs. To ensure that it remains a central priority for all, let us leverage this window of opportunity to integrate, innovate and collaborate in ways that links experience in industrial and developing countries alike. As Corinne said at the beginning, mitigation can only be the result of a collective effort. And something that I always say is that the magic only really happens if we all work together. So I would like to congratulate all the speakers and presenters today. I found it a very, very thought-provoking and interesting session, and I think that we are moving in the right direction. This concludes my short summary. Thank you.
So much. This was great. So I think perfect closing words. There is no excuse for water people to shy away from adaptation, and we must all acknowledge the relevance of water, not only for adaptation, but also mitigation. If there are no questions, I thank everyone, all the speakers and presenters, and of course the audience for listening to our session. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.